It's here. Final Cut Pro 11. Show off. This is the third installment of very in-depth tutorials where I look at all the big and small new features from the amazing magnetic mask, the transcribe to captions, spatial video editing, and a bunch of great new workflow improvements, all of which you can find up here in this playlist. So, up next, spatial video. Another feature that requires Apple Silicon and macOS Sonoma 14.6 or higher. Sorry, Intel users. As anyone who watched my recent video on the subject will know, until now the processing and editing of spatial video clips from your Vision Pro, iPhone 15 or 16 Pro or later were limited to using compressor for processing. Even then, I hinted that this feature would surely become a full-fledged one in Final Cut Pro very soon. While there's no native solution for editing spatial videos in Final Cut Pro yet, and here we are. Final Cut Pro 11 now lets you import, edit, and export stereoscopic 3D video natively for viewing on Apple Vision Pro. Okay, so let's jump right in. Okay, so I have an event full of spatial or 3D or stereoscopic or whatever you would like to call them clips, all of which I can identify as such by the new little box icon at the top right. These can be any clips whose projection mode format is rectangular, by the way, but not equi-rectangular. The metadata for your stereo video must also be defined correctly, which you can check after importing the media, selecting it in the browser, and looking in the information inspector. Here you just want to make sure that the projection mode is set to rectangular and the stereoscopic conform is set to side by side. The so-called hero eye is set automatically based on the camera metadata in the MVHEVC file. This determines which of the two streams of the clip is used for displaying or editing the clip in regular 2D, should the quality between the two eyes differ, as they do from an iPhone, for example, ever so slightly. Something you can ignore for material captured on Apple Vision Pro, since both eyes are captured at identical quality. And lastly, the codec should be MVHEVC. Now, to edit them natively, there are once again multiple ways of setting this up. I can either just right-click one or more of them and select New Project. With that, I automatically get the usual project settings window that is already set up according to my clip. That is, with the video format set to the now new spatial/stereo 3D, 1920 by 1080 and 30 frames per second. Currently, the only resolution and frame rate that at least an iPhone can record spatial video in. Had I right-clicked a spatial video from a Vision Pro, the resolution would be 2200 by 2200, whereby notice that it says resolution per eye, to which I'll get to in a second. Other than that, there is an additional menu where I can choose which of the two perspectives of all my clips is to be considered the so-called hero eye, be it the left or right. Again, this is the eye that is shown when viewing the exported clip on a 2D device. Then there are the usual settings as for any project. Notice that I'm not given the option to use automatic settings. If I cancel out of this, we can look at the other way of setting up my project, namely by simply hitting Command-N to create a new project, with which I get the same window, only in this case with the option to use either custom or automatic settings. Leaving it this way and adding one of the spatial videos to the project would give me the same settings as before. Of course, clicking on the Use Custom Settings button expands the window to expose the project settings as we just saw. Only in this case, the video format is set to whatever I used last, which I can of course change to the spatial 3D format. And if I wanted to change the resolution or the frame rate up or down for some reason, I could do that here. I'll just give it a name, use the automatic settings, and click OK. Now I can just start making my selections of my spatial videos as with any other monoscopic clip. I can append any one of them to the timeline by pressing E. And for the most part, adding effects to a stereo video project is just like adding them to a standard monoscopic project. However, not all the effects that come with Final Cut Pro work well with stereo video. Most clip effects are compatible with stereo video, but the transform, crop, and distort built-in effects should be avoided. In fact, if you select a clip that you just appended to the timeline and look in the video inspector, you'll see that the transform, crop, and distort effects are disabled by default. If I look at the top left of my viewer, I can see that my project resolution is now 3840 by 1080 and 30 frames per second. Selecting any one of the clips in my event shows the exact same resolution and frame rate. And this is where the resolution per eye reference comes into play that we saw in the project settings window. Because a spatial video, of course, has, in this case, 2 streams of HD contained within it that are recorded at the same time. Again, for a more in-depth and technical explanation, check out my previous video on the subject. In other words, technically speaking, the actual resolution of a spatial video is twice the width of the original, therefore 3840, twice 1920. So while editing spatial videos effectively is no different to just editing any other video, there are of course differences in the options to display them, export them, as well as a couple of spatial video specific parameters. So let's look at the display options. Anyone who has edited 360-degree video using the 360-degree viewer will be familiar with most of the display options. Only in this case, you don't have to open an additional viewer to access them. If you have a spatial video project open, such as this one, where I just have some random clips from a diving trip to Thailand, you simply go into the View menu of the viewer, where you will find a new Show Stereoscopic As submenu, where you can choose from 8 different display options, 7 of which are the same as with 360-degree video. I can switch between the left and right eye, where the one that is labeled the hero eye is determined by my project settings. Then there is anaglyph, superimpose, and others. In fact, if you want to be able to objectively assess the parallax and alignment of stereo video scenes in any way before sending it to an Apple Vision Pro, either the anaglyph or even the anaglyph outline display options are your best bet. Anaglyph, whose shortcut is Control-Option-Command-3, shows the view from both eyes. The red channel for the left eye and the blue and green channels together, in other words cyan, for the right eye, are composited together. Probably best for comparing parallax and alignment with anaglyph glasses. Anaglyph outline, on the other hand, with the shortcut Control-Option-Command-5, shows edges in the image and lets you set the parallax using the convergence control, where the edges with red on the left side indicate positive parallax, so further away, and edges with red on the right indicate negative parallax, so closer than the conversion point. This is the most precise view for assessing parallax in a scene. Either are better than nothing, since there unfortunately is not yet a way of live monitoring your edit on a Vision Pro, which you might not even have anyway. Simply get a pair of anaglyphic 3D glasses, which are as little as $1 a piece on Amazon, and set it to anaglyph. The one new display option is both eyes. Selecting this or hitting the keyboard shortcut Control-Option-Command-Grave accent, which on a US keyboard is the key just below the escape key, displays the left and right eyes next to each other. Obviously the left eye on the left and the right eye on the right. But then if you have any spatial video clip selected in the timeline and look into the video inspector, you'll see that we've gotten a new stereoscopic parameter section. Here, if needed, you can swap the two eyes if you intentionally or unintentionally filmed upside down, for example, or if you want to switch the hero eye for displaying in 2D, because one might have better quality than the other for some reason. Above that, we have a convergence slider, also known as parallax, which is the apparent shift in the position of an object in a scene when viewed from 2 different positions. Parallax can be positive or negative, depending on the perceived depth of an object relative to the so-called screen plane. Objects that appear in front of the screen plane or closer to have a higher negative parallax, and vice versa. As another example, if you add a monoscopic video clip to a stereo video project, you might use the convergence control to add positive parallax so that the clip appears to be behind the screen plane. With the auto scale function below selected, both sides will scale up automatically to avoid any gaps on either side of the frame. Conversely, turning this off simply moves the image without scaling, as I'm sure you guessed. Which begs the question, why would you want to deselect this? Well, if I hit Ctrl-T to add the default title and look in the inspector, we can see that within a spatial video project, any and all media, such as titles, also have these stereoscopic options. So with the title active, if I change its convergence in any way, we can see that it also scales, since by default the auto scale is active. Probably something you won't want to do in most cases with a title, but also if you plan to output a generic stereo video rather than a spatial video. So turning it off can be very helpful, but also keep in mind that if you're using a title that has any type of background effect, say for example if I add the text title from the basic text category to my timeline, which if you've seen my previous video on the subject, have various optional effects that you can have applied to the background, such as a background blur or dimming. If you change the convergence for a title such as this, you'll see that the underlying video is affected at the same time. So unless this is actually what you want, you'll want to edit the title to your liking and then make a compound clip of it to avoid it affecting the background. So if you, for example, wanted to move a title or any other object forward or backward over a period of time, you could simply keyframe the convergence. Since this is not yet something that a title can do by itself, that is, move in Z-space. So even adding a title such as the Tumble 3D title would not actually appear to move in Z-space on a Vision Pro, for example. Just something to keep in mind, at least for now. Okay, so now that I have my amazing edit finished, how do I export it to enjoy on my Vision Pro or whatever stereo video compatible device? Well, if I look into the File and Share submenu, or in the Share menu above the inspector, you'll see that Apple has added a new destination, one for Apple Vision Pro and MV-HEVC, even with a nice little Vision Pro icon in front of it. Again, if you're interested in the technical details of this format, check out my video on the subject. It's actually quite fascinating in my opinion. But in any case, if I select this new destination, as usual, the export window opens. Clicking on the Settings tab shows us all the options for export. Of course, the format is Apple devices, and below that I can select between using the 8-bit or even 10-bit version of the MV-HEVC codec, which is recommended especially if you applied any color correction graphics or titles or edited in HDR. Switching to anything else, of course, removes any of the spatial video relevant options. Then there is a pop-up menu for switching spatial video on or off. Leaving this on adds spatial video metadata that subsequently allows me to play the clip in the Photos app on Apple Vision Pro. Turning it off creates a generic stereo video file without any of the spatial metadata. The field of view slider indicates the horizontal field of view of the lenses that were used to capture the images. I can either drag the slider or enter a value. This field of view value is used by Apple Vision Pro to project spatial video at real-world scale in the immersive viewing mode. And this is the point where you should realize that mixing footage from different cameras, for example, from an Apple Vision Pro and an iPhone, is not a good idea. Because as we'll see, the field of view is very different between the two, and cutting between the two types of footage can result in a jarring viewing experience. Also, the two record spatial video in different frame sizes and aspect ratios. That'll result in letterboxing or pillarboxing that can interfere with the spatial edge treatment when the video is played on an Apple Vision Pro. In other words, you'll want to only use footage in a project that came from the same camera, or at least different cameras with the same field of view. And while I've heard that many others claim that you don't need to change anything here, that's unfortunately not entirely true. While you'll surely still get a usable clip, exporting it with the wrong field of view and or baseline, which I'll explain in a second, can result in a suboptimal viewing experience in 3D. In which case, if you edited clips from a Vision Pro, you'll want to enter 79.59 degrees here. If, as in my case, all the footage is from an iPhone, you'll want to enter 45 degrees. Then we have the baseline, which indicates the horizontal or interaxial distance between the two camera lenses used. Again, I can drag the slider or enter a value. For an Apple Vision Pro, you'll want to enter 63.796 millimeters, and for an iPhone, 19.2. And finally, below that, I can increase or decrease the resolution per eye if needed. Again, the native resolution for videos recorded with an Apple Vision Pro is 2200 by 2200, and those from an iPhone is 1920 by 1080. A new little somewhat hidden feature, by the way, is if you look into the action menu at the bottom, you now have the option to add your clip directly to the Photos app once it's been exported. This makes for very easy access from your Apple Vision Pro after the fact, since it automatically syncs to the cloud, allowing you to immediately access it in the Photos app for Apple Vision Pro or any other device with access to your Photos library, saving you an extra step if that's what you'd like. Once finished, I can open it as any other clip in the QuickTime Player or whatever app I have, for example, the Photos app, should I have chosen to save it there. As I explained in my previous video, when viewed on a non-3D capable system, such as a Mac, playback and viewing of spatial videos is no different than that of regular videos. In that case, only the hero eye is shown when playing back. So, what are your thoughts on the whole spatial video thing? Is it something that is relevant to your workflow? Would love to hear your thoughts and experiences down in the comments. Either way, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to get notified when I post my next videos on Final Cut Pro 11. In the meantime, maybe check out the next chapter in this series right here, or the previous video on how to transcribe to captions and create titles and to translate your transcriptions in just a few clicks. See you there. Take care.